Welcome to the New Books Network.
Hello, and from Recall This Book, welcome to part 2 of Recall This Story, a reading of Alice Munro's Miles City, Montana, 1986. I'm still John Plotz, and as you doubtless recall, our guest today is the wonderful novelist Linda Schlossberg. We pick back up midway through the story, just after readers discover that the narrator is no longer married to Andrew, who was her husband at the time of the road trip the story is about. You'll notice the voice of the narrator changes slightly at this moment. All part of the Munro effect. I haven't seen Andrew for years, don't know if he is still thin, has gone completely gray, insists on lettuce, tells the truth, or is hearty and disappointed. We stayed the night in Wenatchee, Washington, where it hadn't rained for weeks. We ate dinner in a restaurant built about a tree, not a sapling in a tub, but a tall, sturdy cottonwood. In the early morning light, we climbed out of the irrigated valley, up dry, rocky, very steep hillsides that would seem to lead to more hills, and there on the top was a wide plateau cut by the great Spokane and Columbia rivers. Grainland and grassland, mile after mile. There were straight roads here and little farming towns with grain elevators. In fact, there was a sign announcing that this county we were going through, Douglas County, had one of the highest wheat yields of any county in the United States. The towns had planted shade trees. At least, I thought they had been planted because there were no such big trees in the countryside. All this was marvelously welcome to me. "Why do I love it so much?" I said to Andrew. "Is it because it isn't scenery?" "It reminds you of home," said Andrew. A bout of severe nostalgia. But he said this kindly. When we said home and meant Ontario, we had very different places in mind. My home was a turkey farm, where my father lived as a widower, and though it was the same house my mother had lived in, had papered, painted, cleaned, furnished, it showed the effects now of neglect and some wild sociability. A life went on in it that my mother could not have predicted or condoned. There were parties for the turkey crew, the gutters and pluckers, and sometimes one or two of the young men would be living there temporarily, inviting their own friends and having their own impromptu parties. This life, I thought, was better for my father than being lonely, and I did not disapprove, had certainly no right to disapprove. Andrew did not like to go there, naturally enough, because he was not the sort who could sit around the kitchen table with the turkey crew telling jokes. They were intimidated by him and contemptuous of him, and it seemed to me that my father, when they were around, had to be on their side, and it wasn't only Andrew who had trouble. I could manage those jokes, but it was an effort. I wished for the days when I was little, before we had the turkeys. We had cows and sold the milk to the cheese factory. A turkey farm is nothing like as pretty as a dairy farm or a sheep farm. You can see that the turkeys are on a straight path to becoming frozen carcasses and table meat. They don't have the pretense of a life of their own, a browsing idyll that cattle have, or pigs in the dappled orchard. Turkey barns are long, efficient buildings, tin sheds. No beams or hay or warm stables. Even the smell of guano seems thinner and more offensive than the usual smell of stable manure. No hint of hay coils and rail fences and songbirds and the flowering hawthorn. The turkeys were all let out into one long field, which they picked clean. They didn't look like great birds there, but like fluttering laundry. Once, shortly after my mother died and I was married, in fact, I was packing to join Andrew in Vancouver, I was at home alone for a couple of days with my father. There was a freakishly heavy rain all night. In the early light, we saw that the turkey field was flooded. At least the low-lying parts of it were flooded. It was like a lake with many islands. The turkeys were huddled on these islands. Turkeys are very stupid. My father would say, "You know a chicken? You know how stupid a chicken is? Well, a chicken is an Einstein compared with a turkey." But they had managed to crowd to higher ground and avoid drowning. Now they might push each other off, suffocate each other, get cold, and die. We couldn't wait for the water to go down. We went out in an old rowboat we had. I rowed, and my father pulled the heavy, wet turkeys into the boat, and we took them to the barn. It was still raining a little. The job was difficult and absurd and very uncomfortable. We were laughing. I was happy to be working with my father. I felt close to all hard, repetitive, appalling work in which the body is finally worn out, the mind sunk, though sometimes the spirit can stay marvelously light, and I was homesick in advance for this life and this place. I thought that if Andrew could see me there in the rain, red-handed, muddy, trying to hold on to turkey legs and row the boat at the same time, he would only want to get me out of there and make me forget about it. This raw life angered him. My attachment to it angered him. I thought that I shouldn't have married him. But who else? One of the turkey crew? And I didn't want to stay there. I might feel bad about leaving, but I would feel worse if somebody made me stay. Andrew's mother lived in Toronto, in an apartment building looking out on Muir Park. When Andrew and his sister were both at home, his mother slept in the living room. Her husband, a doctor, had died when the children were still too young to go to school. She took a secretarial course and sold her house at depression prices, moved to this apartment, managed to raise her children with some help from her relatives, her sister Caroline, her brother-in-law Roger. Andrew and his sister went to private schools and to camp in the summer. I suppose that was courtesy of the Fresh Air Fund, I said once, scornful of his claim that he had been poor. To my mind, Andrew's urban life had been sheltered and fussy. His mother came home with a headache from working all day in the noise, the harsh light of a department store office, but it did not occur to me that hers was a hard or admirable life. I don't think she herself believed that she was admirable, only unlucky. She worried about her work in the office, her clothes, her cooking, her children. She worried most of all about what Roger and Caroline would think. Caroline and Roger lived on the east side of the park in a handsome stone house. Roger was a tall man with a bald, freckled head, a fat, firm stomach. Some operation on his throat had deprived him of his voice. He spoke in a rough whisper, but everybody paid attention. At dinner once in the stone house, where all the dining room furniture was enormous, darkly glowing, palatial, I asked him a question. I think it had to do with Whittaker Chambers, whose story was then appearing in the Saturday Evening Post. The question was mild in tone, but he guessed its subversive intent and took to calling me Mrs. Gromyko, referring to what he alleged to be my sympathies. Perhaps he really craved an adversary and could not find one. At that dinner, I saw Andrew's hand tremble as he lit his mother's cigarette. His uncle Roger had paid for Andrew's education and was on the board of directors of several companies. "He is just an opinionated old man," Andrew said to me later. "What is the point of arguing with him?" Before we left Vancouver, Andrew's mother had written, "Roger seems quite intrigued by the idea of your buying a small car." Her exclamation mark showed apprehension. At that time, particularly in Ontario, the choice of a small European car over a large American car could be seen as some sort of declaration, a declaration of tendencies Roger had been sniffing after all along. "It isn't that small a car," said Andrew huffily. "That's not the point," I said. "The point is, it isn't any of his business." He's bored. We spent the second night in Missoula. We'd been told in Spokane at a gas station that there was a lot of repair work going on along Highway 2 and that we were in for a very hot, dusty drive with long waits, so we turned onto the interstate and drove through Coeur d'Alene and Kellogg into Montana. After Missoula, we turned south towards Butte, but detoured to see Helena, the state capital. In the car, we played Who Am I? Cynthia was somebody dead, and an American, and a girl, possibly a lady. She was not in a story. She had not been seen on television. Cynthia had not read about her in a book. She was not anybody who had come to the kindergarten or a relative of any of Cynthia's friends. "Is she human?" said Andrew with a sudden shrewdness. "No, that's what you forgot to ask." "An animal," I said reflectively. "Is that a question?" 16 questions. "No, it's not a question. I'm thinking. A dead animal." "It's the deer," said Meg, who hadn't been playing. "That's not fair," said Cynthia. "She's not playing." "What deer?" said Andrew. I said, "Yesterday." "The day before," said Cynthia. "Meg wasn't playing. Nobody got it." "The deer on the truck," said Andrew. "It was a lady deer because it didn't have antlers, and it was an American, and it was dead," Cynthia said. Andrew said, "I think it's kind of morbid, being a dead deer." "I got it," said Meg. Cynthia said, "I think I know what morbid is. It's depressing."
Let's stop and talk about this for a sec.
Great.
So first of all, we have this bigger portrait that we get of their family upbringings. And one of the things that we learn about is this turkey field that flood.
Yes.
You spoke a moment ago about how Munro always delves into these scenes of physicality and the kind of the hard work of being in an environment like this. And we see.
And that word raw comes up again, this raw life. Yeah.
This raw life angered him. My attachment to it angered him, meaning Andrew.
Yeah.
I thought that I shouldn't have married him, but who else? One of the turkey crew? I mean, one of the things that's so interesting in this section is that the reader is in possession of information that the character, at least in the story, doesn't know yet. The narrator knows it, but the character traveling in the car doesn't yet know that she will divorce Andrew at some point. Yeah. And for reasons we don't know. There are hints here in the story that perhaps she's not quite the right kind of mother, that she's paying more attention to her work than to her children. We don't know. It could be another fight over the lettuce. We don't know what the...
Yeah, I think it's probably the lettuce.
It's probably the lettuce. I mean, that has broken up stronger relationships than this one. Yeah. We don't know, but we do know that she has this way of thinking about the world that is different from her husband's in some ways. And as readers, one thing that really is interesting to me here is this reference to the flooded turkey field and the dead deer, right? Because here we're starting to get some of the references to bodies of water and to death that we as readers may have been looking for. And as we read, everything in what we learn about how to read a short story, how to analyze it, tells us that these are important sort of touch moments in the text that we need to pay attention to, right? That here we have finally the discussion and references to death that we've been sort of looking for, waiting for since the beginning of the story. And specifically, I think this image of the turkeys sort of hiding on the little islands, right, gathered together on little islands, is especially kind of provocative, as is the image of a child imagining themselves as a dead deer.
Can I just go back to that point about the way that it makes Andrew mad that she has any pleasant memories at all of the turkey farm? Because she says something really poignant there again, which seems related to the idea that Andrew has this ready-made role and she's unable to settle into a role. Because she says, I didn't want to stay there. I might feel bad about leaving, but I would feel worse if somebody had made me stay. So in other words, it isn't as if she's just taken the wrong turn and the answer really was she should be back home on the turkey farm, because the turkey farm is no solution either. But, maybe this is another way of thinking about why she likes being on the between stations, because both places she's arrived at are not actually good fits for her. So maybe when you're on the road, you can at least imagine that the fit is better. Do you know what I mean?
Absolutely. I think we sense that for this narrator, these transitory spaces where you're unsettled and in motion are actually quite comforting, because she doesn't have to be in any one fixed place.
Honestly, Linda, can we pause on that for a second? Because I come from a family that loves being on the road, but not only do we love being on the road, we love being on the road with all the doors locked and a destination ahead. So Lenny and I, my son and I, are both obsessed with trains, and we love getting on a train, knowing what time it's due to arrive. And there's something very role fulfilling about that. So but of course, we also have this tradition of the great American road novel, and there's at least one allusion to Huck Finn in this story, because Steve has a kind of Huck Finn-like childhood. It's just him and his drinking father, except the difference is that Huck Finn is only thought to be drowned, whereas Steve actually does drown. But so there's this Mark Twain road novel in the background. But the comfort of the road trip, is that a comfort of being secure in your role and everything's tidy and the family's all together? Or is it the comfort of what the hell, anything might happen? It's better than, anywhere but here.
This is a great question. I think in the context of the story, we, we're sort of on a journey with the characters, right? We're alongside them in the car on this road trip. And, a road trip, as you said, it has a beginning and a middle and an end, right? Whatever destination that you're headed toward. And to me, I think this is also kind of a great analog for the reading experience, right? That as we read, we think we know where we're going. We have a set destination in mind. And at times there are these kind of blips, almost like these little turnoffs in the scenario where the story goes maybe off script a little bit, right? Puts the map aside. And we wonder as readers how we're supposed to understand these things, right? And so part of our job as we read is to try to map out the different stops along the way in the journey of reading the story. And we trust that each of these stops has significance in the way that if we go on a road trip, we hope that each of our stops are meaningful and will, create some sort of family memory.
Linda, when you and I were discussing this story, one thing I said I loved about this story is that it sets up something that, like, from, say, Thomas Hardy, who's just one of my favorite novelists. Thomas Hardy sets up worlds in which there's these very strongly socially conformist roles. And then you get characters like Tess, who doesn't really fit into one of the roles, or Jude the Obscurer, or Jude and Sue. And that economy is like there's a world of conformists, and then there's people who kind of break out of that, and they are different and they operate according to different rules. And I feel like that's where Alice Munro is moving us to see, like, okay, there's the establishment figures, and then there's the people like you were describing our narrator and her embryo Hitler friends as being kind of ironic, modern, small car driving, not sodden, and not, not in that fog of the maternal role. And yet the story is also steering us towards a place where that distinction between being a conformist and being a nonconformist turns out to matter less than you think it matters.
That's a great point. I think that this is a character who's very invested in those differences between herself and these in-laws. She's very wedded to this image of herself. And I should note too that I think that in some ways she's also kind of, a figure for the typical Alice Munro reader. I mean, anyone who goes into an Alice Munro story anticipates some sense of unconventionality, right? So,
yeah,
so we are very much allied with her, and we're very much allied with her, not only, again, simply because she's the first person narrator of the story, right? But also because we probably identify with some of the ways in which she describes herself.
Helena, an old silver mining town, looked forlorn to us even in the morning sunlight. Then Bozeman and Billings, not forlorn in the slightest, energetic, strung-out towns with miles of blinding tinsel fluttering over used car lots. We got too tired and hot even to play Who Am I? These busy, prosaic cities reminded me of similar places in Ontario, and I thought about what was really waiting there. The great tombstone furniture of Roger and Caroline's dining room, the dinners for which I must iron the children's dresses and warn them about forks, and then the other table 100 miles away, the jokes of my father's crew. The pleasures I had been thinking of, looking at the countryside or drinking a Coke in an old-fashioned drugstore with fans and a high-pressed tin ceiling, would have to be snatched in between. Meg's asleep, Cynthia said. She's so hot. She makes me hot in the same seat with her. I hope she isn't feverish, I said, not turning around. What are we doing this for, I thought, and the answer came, to show off. To give Andrew's mother and my father the pleasure of seeing their grandchildren. That was our duty. But beyond that, we wanted to show them something. What strenuous children we were, Andrew and I. What relentless seekers of approbation. It was as if at some point we had received an unforgettable, indigestible message that we were far from satisfactory and that the most commonplace success in life was probably beyond us. Roger dealt out such messages, of course. That was his style. But Andrew's mother, my own mother and father couldn't have meant to do so. All they meant to tell us was, watch out. Get along. When I was in high school, my father teased me that I was getting to think I was so smart I would never find a boyfriend. He would have forgotten that in a week. I never forgot it. Andrew and I didn't forget things. We took umbrage. I wish there was a beach, said Cynthia. There probably is one, Andrew said, right around the next curve. There isn't any curve, she said, sounding insulted. That's what I mean. I wish there was some more lemonade. I will just wave my magic wand and produce some, I said. Okay, Cynthia, would you rather have grape juice? Will I do a beach while I'm at it? She was silent, and soon I felt repentant. Maybe in the next town there might be a pool, I said. I looked at the map. In Miles City. Anyway, there'll be something cool to drink. How far is it? Andrew said. Not so far, I said. 30 miles, about. In Miles City, said Cynthia, in the tones of an incantation, there is a beautiful blue swimming pool for children and a park with lovely trees. Andrew said to me, you could have started something. But there was a pool. There was a park, too, though not quite the oasis of Cynthia's fantasy. Prairie trees, cottonwoods, and poplars, worn grass, and a high wire fence around the pool. Within this fence, a wall, not yet completed, of cement blocks. Nobody was around. There were no shouts or splashes. Over the entrance, I saw a sign that said the pool was closed every day from noon until 2 o'clock. It was then 25 after 12. Nevertheless, I called out, is anybody there? I thought somebody must be around because there was a small truck parked near the entrance. On the side of the truck were these words, we have brains to fix your drains. We have Roto-Rooter too. A girl came out wearing a red lifeguard's shirt over her bathing suit. Sorry, we're closed. We were just driving through, I said. We close every day from 12 until 2. It's on the sign. She was eating a sandwich. I saw the sign, I said, but this is the first water we've seen for so long, and the children are awfully hot, and I wondered if they could just dip in and out, just 5 minutes. We'd watch them. A boy came into sight behind her. He was wearing jeans and a t-shirt with the words Roto-Rooter on it. I was going to say we were driving from British Columbia to Ontario, but I remembered that Canadian place names usually meant nothing to Americans. We're driving right across the country, I said. We haven't time to wait for the pool to open. We were just hoping the children could get cooled off. Cynthia came running up barefoot behind me. Mother, where is my bathing suit? Then she stopped, sensing the serious adult negotiations. Meg was climbing out of the car, just wakened, with her top pulled up and her shorts pulled down, showing her pink stomach. Is it just those two? The girl said. Just the two. We'll watch them. I can't let any adults in. If it's just the two, I guess I could watch them. I'm having my lunch. She said to Cynthia, do you want to come in the pool? Yes, please, said Cynthia firmly. Meg looked at the ground. Just a short time, because the pool is really closed, I said. We appreciate this very much, I said to the girl. Well, I can eat my lunch out there if it's just the two of them. She looked towards the car as if she thought I might try to spring some more children on her. When I found Cynthia's bathing suit, she took it into the changing room. She would not permit anybody, even Meg, to see her naked. I changed Meg, who stood on the front seat of the car. She had a pink cotton bathing suit with straps that crossed and buttoned. There were ruffles across the seat. She is hot, I said, but I don't think she's feverish. I loved helping Meg to dress or undress because her body still had the solid unself-consciousness, the sweet indifference, something of the milky smell of a baby's body. Cynthia's body had long ago been pared down, shaped, and altered into Cynthia. We all liked to hug Meg, press and nuzzle her. Sometimes she would scowl and beat us off, and this forthright independence, this ferocious bashfulness, simply made her more appealing, more apt to be teased and tickled in the way of family love. Andrew and I sat in the car with the windows open. I could hear a radio playing, and I thought it must belong to the girl or her boyfriend. I was thirsty and got out of the car to look for a concession stand or perhaps a soft drink machine somewhere in the park. I was wearing shorts, and the backs of my legs were slick with sweat. I saw a drinking fountain at the other side of the park and was walking toward it in a roundabout way, keeping to the shade of the trees. No place became real till you got out of the car. Dazed with heat, with the sun on the blistered houses, the pavement, the burned grass, I walked slowly. I paid attention to a poor, thin leaf, ground a popsicle stick under the heel of my sandal, squinted at a trash can strapped to a tree that I would never see again. Where are the children? I turned around and moved quickly, not quite running, to a part of the fence beyond which the cement wall was not completed. I could see some of the pool. I saw Cynthia standing about waist-deep in the water, fluttering her hands on the surface and discreetly watching something at the end of the pool, which I could not see. I thought by her pose, her discretion, the look on her face that she must be watching some byplay between the lifeguard and her boyfriend. I couldn't see Meg, but I thought she must be playing in the shallower water. Both the shallow and the deep ends of the pool were out of my sight. Cynthia. I had to call twice before she knew where my voice was coming from. Cynthia, where's Meg? It always seems to me, when I recall this scene, that Cynthia turns very gracefully towards me, then turns all around in the water, making me think of a ballerina on point, then spreads her arms in a gesture of the stage. Disappeared. Cynthia was naturally graceful, and she did take dancing lessons, so those movements may have been, as I have described. She did say disappeared after looking all around the pool, but the strangely artificial style of speech and gesture, the lack of urgency, is more likely my invention. The fear I felt instantly when I couldn't see Meg, even while I was telling myself she must be in the shallower water, must have made Cynthia's movement seem unbearably slow and inappropriate to me, and the tone in which she could say, disappeared, before the implication struck her, or was she covering at once some ever-ready guilt, was heard by me as quite exquisitely, monstrously self-possessed. I cried out for Andrew, and the lifeguard came into view. She was pointing towards the deep end of the pool, saying, "What's that?" There, just within my view, a cluster of pink ruffles appeared, a bouquet, beneath the surface of the water. Why would a lifeguard stop and point? Why would she ask what that was? Why didn't she just dive into the water and swim to it? She didn't swim. She ran all the way around the edge of the pool. But by this time, Andrew was over the fence. So many things seemed not quite plausible. Cynthia's behavior, then the lifeguard's, and now I had the impression that Andrew jumped with one bound over this fence, which seemed about 7 feet high. He must have climbed it very quickly, getting a grip on the wire. I could not jump or climb it, so I ran to the entrance where there was a sort of latticed gate locked. It was not very high, and I did pull myself over it. I ran through the cement corridors, through the disinfectant pool, 4 feet, and came out on the edge of the pool. The drama was over. Andrew had got to Meg first and had pulled her out of the water. He just had to reach over and grab her, because she was swimming somehow with her head underwater. She was moving toward the edge of the pool. He was carrying her now, and the lifeguard was trotting along behind. Cynthia had climbed out of the water and was running to meet them. The only person aloof from the situation was the boyfriend, who had stayed on the bench at the shallow end, drinking a milkshake. He smiled at me, and I thought that unfeeling of him, even though the danger was past. He may have meant it kindly. I noticed he had not turned the radio off, just down. Meg had not swallowed any water. She hadn't even scared herself. Her hair was plastered to her head, and her eyes were wide open, golden with amazement. "I was getting the comb," she said. "I didn't know it was deep." Andrew said, "She was swimming. She was swimming by herself. I saw her bathing suit in the water, and then I saw her swimming." "She nearly drowned," Cynthia said, "didn't she? Meg nearly drowned." "I don't know how it could have happened," said the lifeguard. "One moment she was there, and the next she wasn't. What had happened was that Meg had climbed out of the water at the shallow end and run along the edge of the pool toward the deep end. She saw a comb that somebody had dropped lying on the bottom. She crouched down and reached in to pick it up, quite deceived as to the depth of the water. She went over the edge and slipped into the pool, making such a light splash that nobody heard, not the lifeguard who was kissing her boyfriend, nor Cynthia who was watching them. That must have been the moment under the trees when I thought, where are the children? It must have been the same moment. At that moment, Meg was slipping, surprised, into the treacherously clear blue water. "It's okay," I said to the lifeguard, who was nearly crying. "She can move pretty fast." Although that wasn't what we usually said about Meg at all. We said she thought everything over. We said she thought everything over and took her time. "You swam, Meg," said Cynthia in a congratulatory way. She told us about the kissing later. "I didn't know it was deep," Meg said. "I didn't drown." We had lunch at a takeout place, eating hamburgers and fries at a picnic table not far from the highway. In my excitement, I forgot to get Meg a plain hamburger and had to scrape off the relish and mustard with plastic spoons, then wipe the meat with a paper napkin before she would eat it. I took advantage of the trash can there to clean out the car. Then we resumed driving east with the car windows open in front. Cynthia and Meg fell asleep in the back seat. Andrew and I now talked quietly about what had happened. Suppose I hadn't had the impulse just at that moment to check on the children. Suppose we'd gone uptown to get drinks, as we'd thought of doing. How had Andrew got over the fence? Did he jump or climb? He couldn't remember. How had he reached Meg so quickly? And think of the lifeguard not watching, and Cynthia, taken up with the kissing. not seeing anything else, not seeing Meg drop over the edge. Disappeared. But she swam. She held her breath and came up swimming. What a chain of lucky links. That was all we spoke about, luck. But I was compelled to picture the opposite. At this moment, we could have been filling out forms. Meg removed from us, Meg's body being prepared for shipment to Vancouver, where we had never noticed such a thing as a graveyard, or to Ontario. The scribbled drawing she had made this morning would still be in the back seat of the car. How could this be born all at once? How did people bear it? The plump, sweet shoulders and hands and feet, the fine brown hair, the rather satisfied, secretive expression, all exactly the same as when she had been alive. The most ordinary tragedy. A girl drowned in a swimming pool at noon on a sunny day. Things tidied up quickly. The pool opened as usual at 2 o'clock. The lifeguard is a bit shaken up and gets the afternoon off. She drives away with her boyfriend in the Roto-Rooter truck. The body sealed away in some kind of shipping coffin. Sedatives, phone calls, arrangements. Such a sudden vacancy, a blind sinking and shifting. Waking up groggy from the pills. Thinking for a moment it wasn't true. Thinking, if only we hadn't stopped, if only we hadn't taken this route, if only they hadn't let us use the pool. Probably no one would ever have known about the comb. There's something trashy about this kind of imagining, isn't there? Something shameful. Laying your finger on the wire to get the safe shock, feeling a little bit of what it's like, and then pulling back. I believe that Andrew was more scrupulous than I about such things, and that at this moment he was really trying to think about something else. When I stood apart from my parents at Steve Gawley's funeral and watched them, and had this new unpleasant feeling about them, I thought that I was understanding something about them for the first time. It was a deadly serious thing. I was understanding that they were implicated. Their big, stiff, dressed-up bodies did not stand between me and sudden death, or any kind of death. They gave consent, so it seemed. They gave consent to the death of children and to my death. Not by anything they said or thought, but by the very fact that they had made children. They had made me. They had made me, and for that reason, my death, however grieved they were, however they carried on, would seem to them anything but impossible or unnatural. This was a fact, and even then I knew they were not to blame. But I did blame them. I charged them with effrontery, hypocrisy, and not just on my own behalf, on Steve Gawley's behalf, and on behalf of all children who knew that by rights they should have sprung up free to live a new superior kind of life, not to be caught in the snares of grown-ups with their sex and funerals. Steve Gawley drowned, people said, because he was next thing to an orphan and was let run free. If he had been warned enough and given chores to do and kept in check, he wouldn't have fallen from an untrustworthy tree branch into a spring pond, a full gravel pit near the river. He wouldn't have drowned. He was neglected, he was free, so he drowned, and his father took it as an accident, such as might happen to a dog. He didn't have a good suit for the funeral, and he didn't bow his head for the prayers, but he was the only grown-up that I let off the hook. He was the only one I didn't see giving consent. Couldn't prevent anything. But he wasn't implicated in anything either, not like the others, saying the Lord's Prayer in their unnaturally weighted voices, oozing religion and dishonor. At Glendive, not far from the North Dakota border, we had a choice, either to continue on the interstate or head northeast toward Williston, taking Route 16, then some secondary roads that would get us back to Highway 2. We agreed that the interstate would be faster and that it was important for us not to spend too much time, that is, money, on the road. Nevertheless, we decided to cut back to Highway 2. I just like the idea of it better, I said. Andrew said, that's because it's what we planned to do in the beginning. We missed seeing Kalispell and Havre and Wolf Point. I like the names. We'll see them on the way back. Andrew saying on the way back in such an easy tone was a surprising pleasure to me. Of course, I had believed that we would be coming back with our car and our lives and our family intact, having covered all that distance, having dealt somehow with those loyalties and problems, held ourselves up for inspection in such a foolhardy way. But it was a relief to hear him say it. What I can't get over, said Andrew, is how you got the signal. It's got to be some kind of extra sense that mothers have. Partly, I wanted to believe that, to bask in my extra sense. Partly I wanted to warn him, to warn everybody, never to count on it. What I can't understand, I said, is how you get over that fence. Neither can I. So we went on, with the two in the back seat trusting us because of no choice, and we ourselves trusting to be forgiven in time what first had to be seen and condemned by those children, whatever was flippant, arbitrary, careless, callous, all our natural and particular mistakes. Wow, I found that a strangely emotional experience reading that.
It is a very moving story, and I can imagine for anyone who's a parent of children that it would be a difficult read. I know people who have said that they read this story first before they'd had children, and then after they'd had children. It's a very different kind of experience.
Yeah, it partly because I think, I mean, well, I won't speak for everyone, but most every parent I've ever talked to has moments like that that you can point to. And in those moments, you do the thing that she calls trashy, which is that you play it over and over. Like as we're speaking, I am picturing two moments that I can think of that are, you know, I don't go the full trashy route of imagining the funeral and the forms and the body, but I mean, I can imagine them going otherwise than the way they did. So yeah, it's intense.
Absolutely. And Munro has said that this was based on a kind of near miss of this kind with one of her own children.
Like Andrew, I feel like is still wants her to fit into her role, her ready-made role, as well as he is prepared to fit into his. He gets to be the fence jumper, and she gets to have like that special sense, which is that you're never switched off about your kids, except we know perfectly well that she is, because she also has this other way of being in the world, which is her other noticing. To be a watcher, not a keeper. That's the distinction she makes, right?
Exactly.
So as you said, she's watching, but she's just not watching. She's not watching the kids.
She's not watching the kids. And luckily, she does have this moment, and we don't know if it is an extra, sense, as Andrew puts it, or if I like your interpretation that he wants to place her in this particular maternal role, or it's just a coincidence. But she, when she turns back finally to the pool, she also is there. She sort of, as it says, the drama is over, right? Everything is about her seeing it. So she's almost absent even from that moment too.
Yeah.
The other thing about
is there some irony, Linda, that we know that they want to be the young, unconventional modern parents, and part of that is like showing up at the pool during the 12 to 2 hour when adults are not allowed in, and being willing to break the rule to send the kids in, but not being willing to break the rule of like insisting, well, wait, if my kid is in the pool, I also need to be in there. So it's like they've broken a rule, but they've done it in like the way that's like most convenient for them.
So one way of reading it is that she is taking us to task for being readers who are longing for a certain kind of ending that we've been primed to anticipate from the very beginning of the story. And the other thing we might say, more generous spirit, would be that she's simply speaking to a certain human impulse, right? To imagine these alternative endings that aren't part of the original, itinerary that this story set out for at the beginning.
Yeah, I like that point. Another way of thinking about it, though, is that you can't help, like, if you think about why it is that both Cynthia and Meg had the dead deer in mind, it's that, of course, a lot of stuff happens in any life, and not all of it is morbid or trashy or rises to the level of high drama. But if you come close to a live wire in your life, you can't help but fixating on those moments. So it is perhaps trashy to tell yourself counterfactuals, but what else are you going to do? It's not as if you're just going to get away from those things and focus on what you're going to have for dinner tonight, or, how Meg likes her hamburger or something like that.
Right, except for she tells us that the husband, Andrew, is a little more, I think the word she uses is scrupulous about this and doesn't want to speculate about these things.
Yeah. Well, he's busy thinking about how much better his sandwich would be if it had lettuce on it. So I'm not sure that's in his favor here because he's better at like playing the role
Right.
of like, the well-defined husband, but there's, I don't know. They're not married anymore.
They're not married
So,
anymore. We do know that. One thing that I also think is interesting about the end of the story is this wonderful moment where the narrator says, about how which road they're going to take back. She says, "We miss seeing Kalispell and Havre and Wolf Point. I like the names."
yeah,
And Andrew said,
yeah,
"We'll see them on the way back." So
yeah,
she's almost like a child there, right? I like the name. I want to see Wolf Point. And he said,
yeah,
almost in this paternal way, "We'll see them on the way back."
yeah,
And she says to us as readers, "Andrew saying on the way back in such an easy tone was a surprising pleasure to me. Of course, I had believed we would be coming back with our car and our lives and our family intact, having covered all that distance." So, this is a great echo of that wonderful moment at the beginning where Meg doesn't understand that they're coming back. She thinks they're
yeah,
good, right?
yeah,
And there's something in this narrator who's still childlike, right? Who's still, I think, not quite embracing that parental role. She still needs to be reassured that they will go back.
yeah,
As you pointed out, one
yeah,
thing that we as readers know, of course, is that this marriage will dissolve ultimately
yeah.
in the future.
Can we talk about, for me, this would be the final point, would be that the fact that we go back to Steve Gall's
Mm.
funeral, that there's a new level of understanding of what it was she was feeling. And so there's this amazing switch. I love how she pivots between one time and another, because, we really are in three times here, right? There's the narrating present in which she's no longer married to Andrew. And then there's the young adulthood. And then there's behind that, perhaps the same distance away, is the fact of Steve Gall's funeral, the sort of Huck Finn moment. This unpleasant feeling was that the parents consent to their dying. Like parents, by bringing you into the world, consent to your having all sorts of horrible things happen to you. So that feels, again, that's why I'm saying it seems like it gets beyond the moral distinction. Like Roger is a pompous fuddy-duddy and we are hip young parents. That is a distinction, yes, but it's ultimately without a difference because every adult is okay with the fact that children might die.
Right, right. Every parent is complicit here and
Yeah,
potentially to blame. And she is having now this kind of retrospective understanding of that feeling of discomfort and disgust and anger that she had as a child, right? The thing that she
yeah,
sensed, which is that by bringing children into the world and allowing them to live, parents are also potentially allowing them to die. And that is a kind
yeah,
of terrifying and heartbreaking realization. As she sits in the car, she
yeah,
has this, this last line is so powerful, and hearing you read it was incredible. That the children, have no choice but to trust the adults. So we went on with the two in the back seat trusting us because of no choice, right? So the children have to trust us. And then she flips it and she says, "And we ourselves trusting to be forgiven in time what first had to be seen and condemned by those children, whatever was flippant, arbitrary, careless, callous, all our natural and particular mistakes." So she's understanding that her children in turn are going to have the same realization.
yeah,
Same realization that parents always, just by virtue of allowing children to the world, have put them at risk. And yet she's hoping, she's just sitting there hoping that they will in fact forgive her for that.
yeah.
Incredible.
And I totally agree. I think you're reading about. I think that's right. I think that is the crucial moment. But I want to go back to the moment where she lets Steve's father off the hook.
Mm.
And the reason she lets him off the hook is that what she sees is all the parents. I think she sees all the parents around creating an ethical distinction between themselves and Steve's father. Like, he was just a single dad. He did all these things wrong, and therefore Steve died. Like, everybody sets up a universe in which there's a kind of feasible ethical framework for allowing Steve to die and everybody else to live, except for the dad, because he doesn't accept that, of course. I mean, even if he takes it as an accident, we understand. I mean, he's broken by it. And as a kid, her sympathy is with the adult who, like, registers, no, this is fucking awful. And it's not something that you can sort out into the good people and the bad people. It's just awful.
Yeah, as a kid,
and that
has the purity of mind, as it were, to recognize that he is the adult who's not hypocritical, who doesn't have, the nice suit to wear in mourning. And it's the other adults who are engaged in this process of denial.
Honestly, I would connect this to Huck Finn, which probably I'm overly obsessed with. But part of the point of Huck Finn is that the adult life of that slave-owning town of Hannibal, Missouri, looks very rational. And by their own lights, all those adults are kind of living a good life. And Huck and his trashy father are living a bad life. But, of course, from the narratorial perspective, every one of those adults is implicated. They have to be. They could be good by their own standards, but they're implicated in living in a slave society.
Right. And famously, Huck is the only one who at least is able to express this critique of the culture to the reader.
Right, which is completely childish in some way, but it's also childlike.
Right. Yeah. Right. His childish and childlike understanding of the world is exactly the one that the reader empathizes with. And
which is why your reading of the final line is so convincing, because it's like you kind of got to go through realizing that adults actually are hypocrites. They're stuck in this moral universe that makes less sense than they think it makes, and yet you need your children to know that about you and still forgive you, because at the end of the day, what else can they do? Wow. Well, Linda, thank you so much. I feel like you took us everywhere there, every twist and turn of the story. And it's amazing to talk with someone who is both a writer themselves and also a teacher, so that you can kind of be with me in my like professor/student mode, but you're also thinking about what it would be like to make a story like this.
Oh, well, this was fantastic. I loved hearing you read the second part too. And thank you so much for having me be part of this series and for this great conversation. I mean, this story just is such a knockout, and it was such a great experience to get to read through it with you and talk about it.
Yeah. I will right back at you. And like you said, we only have another 149 to go.
That's right.
I hope that I can take every Alice Munro story with as much time and attention as you gave to this one, because they definitely deserve it. So let me just close by saying that Recall This Book is the creation of John Plotz and Elizabeth Ferry. Sound editing is by Kamaya Bagla, and music comes from a song by Eric Chaslow and Barbara Cassidy. We gratefully acknowledge support from Brandeis University and the Mandel Center for the Humanities. And we always want to hear from you with your comments, criticism, or suggestions for future episodes. And we suggest that if you enjoyed today's show, you should definitely take a listen to Recall This Story with Steve Macaulay, and an upcoming one about Sylvia Townsend Warner, which I will tease right now. And I suggest, that if you liked it, you should forward it to 5 people or write a review and rate us wherever you get your podcast. So thank you so much for listening. And Linda, thank you so much for doing this.
Thank you, John.